As you probably already know, in the past couple of years, AI-adjacent companies, some of which were once flush with cash, have had to borrow absurd amounts of money to finance their AI investments. In just the first 7 months of 2026, US tech companies have already borrowed more than $300 billion, and JP Morgan expects them to issue an additional $200 billion before this year is done. This would take the total issuance to about $500 billion, which would account for 20% of all debt issued in US markets this year. To put this in context, in the build-up to the dot-com bubble, tech-related debt peaked at 14% of total issuance. So this implies that AI spending is ramping up faster than in any other comparable historical episode, including the railway boom. However, it turns out this is only the tip of the iceberg, and the AI companies have been using a whole load of financial trickery to borrow trillions more off book. So in this video, we're going to explain how these companies are able to effectively hide trillions of dollars of debt, and what risks this might present for the sector as a whole. Which flag is better, Canada or Iceland? How about Japan or Mexico, Albania or Barbados? How about a battle of the dragons, Wales or Bhutan? Cast your vote in our official flag ranking survey by clicking the link in the description. So, this story sort of began last week when Nikkei published a report which claimed that 5 of the biggest AI-adjacent companies in the US, namely Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, and Oracle, were hiding an additional $1.65 trillion in off-the-book debts, more than the roughly $1.35 trillion of debt that they've explicitly admitted to on their balance sheets. This was all confirmed by another investigation by Bloomberg published at about the same time, which found that, like its fellow tech giants, Nvidia also had more off than on-book debt. Now, you might assume that shady financing is the norm among big US corporations. But while there always has been a bit of it going on, the volume of hidden debt has ballooned over the past couple of years. And unsurprisingly, most of this increase can be attributed to AI-related costs. There are 2 main methods by which these companies have been able to, quote-unquote, hide this debt. The first is via what are known as long-term purchase agreements, which are basically when, instead of borrowing money in order to buy something, you commit to buying something in the future. This still creates a debt-like liability. After all, you now owe someone money in the future, but you don't have to chalk it down as a loan on your balance sheet. In the context of the AI boom/bubble, these long-term purchase agreements are mainly used for chips, with lots of AI companies committing to buying some very expensive high-end chips in the future. Nvidia, for instance, has $119 billion in binding, non-cancelable future purchase obligations, primarily with manufacturing partners like TSMC, for bespoke production capacity for Nvidia's own chips. The second, and slightly scarier method, is via what are known as lease agreements, which are basically when a company agrees to rent something for a fixed period of time. Under US accounting laws, public companies only have to report each rent payment as a cash outflow, not the total amount that they've committed to spend over the course of the lease. For instance, imagine I want to build a data center that costs $10 billion, and I need to borrow money to afford it. I could just borrow the money and build it, but that would require me to take out a big loan, which, if I'm a public company, I would have to report on my next quarterly earnings. So instead, I might get another company to basically build the data center for me, even if they'll probably have to take out a loan themselves, and then enter a long-term lease agreement with said company to pay them the $10 billion, and probably a bit extra to compensate them for the risk, in quarterly installments over the next 10 years. In this scenario, I would still effectively owe this company at least $10 billion, but I wouldn't have to admit it in my reports. I would only have to admit that I spent $250 million this quarter as part of the lease agreement, which obviously sounds a lot better than I borrowed $10 billion for another big data center. Big AI companies also offer what are known as credit backstops to these intermediary companies. In other words, they promise them that if the intermediary company runs out of money or is unable to borrow more, they'll step in to cover them. Again, this creates a liability, but one that you don't have to admit on your balance sheet. These lease agreements have become increasingly popular in recent years. Oracle, for instance, has an eye-watering $260 billion of future lease commitments that will eventually land on its books, which is a lot of hidden debt for a company with $67 billion in annual revenue, and was one of the big reasons that its credit rating was downgraded earlier this month. Anyway, you get the idea. These big AI companies are increasingly relying on slightly dodgy off-book techniques to finance their investments. Growing awareness of all of this might explain why their borrowing costs are apparently on the up. This is why in its upcoming funding round for a new 1 gigawatt data center project in Texas, which Meta is essentially financing via the sort of lease agreement we described a second ago, Meta and its intermediaries have had to offer yields of up to 7.5% to find creditors, up from the 7.1% they had to offer only 9 months ago to find funding for their Hyperion data center in Manhattan. Similarly, this might also explain why the cost of insuring 5-year bonds issued by big AI companies has spiked in the past couple of days. Oracle looks particularly shaky here, with credit default swaps on Oracle jumping to 2.12% last week, which means that it costs $212,000 a year to insure $10 million of Oracle bonds against default. Now, as a final thing, it's worth stressing that not all AI companies are equally dependent on dodgy debt, or equally exposed to any increase in AI-related borrowing costs. Companies like Alphabet and Meta, which are proven moneymakers with diversified revenue streams, are obviously less exposed than companies like Oracle, which are more aggressively leveraged and more singularly dependent on AI-related revenues. However, while they're hard to actually measure quantitatively, there are clearly lots of so-called contagion risks. In other words, if one company goes down, this could take others down with it. This is in part because it would undermine investor confidence in the industry as a whole, but also because, more directly, there's a sort of circular financing going on, which means that one company going under would have very direct consequences on the balance sheet of its neighbors. Now, this is a huge story, and I can imagine that you felt pretty helpless by the headlines recently. And trust us, so have we. And that's not just because we want a comforting story, it's because we need evidence that doing something still matters. You may feel that individual actions are meaningless, but what if we told you that as a community, you can still make a difference? Well, that's why we joined Planet Wild. Planet Wild is not just your usual environmental organization. It's a passionate community of over 25,000 members, including myself, built around a clear focus: protecting and conserving the world we all live in. We're more aware than ever that the world is a scary place, and the state of our planet needs to change. So every single month, the Planet Wild community funds a mission to protect endangered animals, restore our forests, and clean our oceans. The best part is they document all of the missions through videos on their YouTube channel, so we get to see what our contributions help to achieve. Examples of their incredible work span from training dogs to protect loggerhead sea turtles, restoring the cloud forests of Colombia, to turning a former fish farm into a beaver habitat. So where do you and I come in? Well, by becoming a member, we're directly funding a brand new nature mission from the comfort of our own home. With Planet Wild, you can make an impact without being on the ground yourself. Big or small, your difference matters, and you can contribute as little as $6 a month to help protect nature and give back to the planet that we all share. It's no secret that we're huge fans of Planet Wild, so much so that the first 100 people to sign up with the code NEWSGLOBAL7 will get their first month paid for directly by us. All you have to do is scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description to get started. You can cancel your membership at any time, so there's absolutely no catch with Planet Wild. It's just an amazing way to give back to nature and create a real lasting change. And you'll never be left hanging as to where your money goes, as you'll be able to see the impact in less than 30 days right here on YouTube. So if you want to see them in action, check out their mission transforming a former fish farm into a beaver habitat.